I never thought I'd be the guy writing one of these stories, the kind you read online and think, no way that really happened. But brother, I'm telling you, I saw this whole thing go down with my own eyes, and I'm still shaking my head 3 months later. Hell, I'm still getting goosebumps thinking about it. This is the kind of story that makes you believe in cosmic justice, the kind that makes you want to buy the next round for everyone in the bar. It was a Tuesday night in October when everything started. I was at St. Mary's downtown for my own routine appointment. Nothing serious, just follow-up stuff from when an IED got a little too friendly with my Humvee back in '07. You know how it is with the VA. Sometimes you need civilian docs to actually fix what Uncle Sam broke. The waiting room was pretty quiet, just a few folks scattered around reading magazines that were probably older than some of the soldiers in Afghanistan. When the ambulance sirens started wailing outside, you know that sound cuts right through you, especially when you've heard it in places where it meant your buddy might not make it home. That particular wail that means someone's having the worst day of their life, and it's about to get worse. The automatic doors burst open, and the paramedics wheeled in this guy on a stretcher. Man, he looked rough. I'm talking rough. His clothes were torn and filthy, looked like he'd been living under a bridge for months. His hair was matted, beard all scraggly and dirty, and he smelled like he hadn't seen a shower since the Clinton administration. Blood was soaking through some makeshift bandages on his side, and I'll tell you what, those bandages weren't random rags. Someone with medical training had applied them. Perfect pressure points, proper gauze placement. But who looks that close when you're seeing a homeless guy bleeding out, right? "Gunshot wound to the abdomen," one of the paramedics was calling out to the nurses, his voice cutting through the usual ER chaos. "Found him behind the Walmart on 5th Street. Vitals are dropping fast. Looks like he tried to patch himself up with some rags, but whoever did this knew what they were doing. These bandages probably saved his life long enough to get him here." The lead nurse, a woman who looked like she'd seen every kind of hell the city could produce, was already grabbing supplies and barking orders. "Get him to Trauma 1. Some one-page surgery. How long ago was he shot?" "Neighbor heard the gunshot maybe 40 minutes ago. Anonymous tip called it in." 40 minutes. In trauma medicine, that's a lifetime. This guy should have been dead already. The nurses wheeled him right past me, and I caught a glimpse of his face. There was something about his eyes, man. Even through all the pain and the grime, there was this look. I'd seen it before in guys who'd been through some serious shit. Combat veterans have this particular 1,000-yard stare, and this guy had it in spades. But there was something else there, too. A kind of resigned acceptance, like he was used to being invisible, used to being overlooked. That's when Dr. Richard Kellerman walked into the ER, and I could see trouble coming from a mile away. Now I'd heard about this guy. He was supposedly the hotshot surgeon at St. Mary's. Real big shot, Drives a Mercedes, lives in some mansion up in the hills, charges more for one surgery than most folks make in a year. Word was he only took the high-paying cases, the ones with good insurance and clean records. But here's the thing about Dr. Kellerman that I noticed right away. His hands were shaking. Not obvious, but I've got a trained eye for that kind of thing. Combat does that to you. His latex gloves were pristine, almost obsessively so, and he was unconsciously rubbing hand sanitizer on them every few seconds. The guy had developed some serious cleanliness issues, probably from the pandemic, but it had turned into something more, something borderline neurotic. Dr. Kellerman took one look at the homeless guy being wheeled in, and his face just went cold. But it wasn't just disgust. It was fear. Genuine, visceral fear of contamination. I mean, I was sitting maybe 20 feet away, and I could see his whole body tense up like he was looking at a biohazard. "What's the story on this one?" he asked the head nurse, Dr. Patricia Williams. She was a no-nonsense type, been working ER for probably 30 years, seen every kind of human tragedy you could imagine, and a few you couldn't. "Gunshot victim," she said, reading from the chart with practiced efficiency. "John Doe appears to be homeless. Single GSW to the lower left quadrant. The wound's serious but definitely operable. BP is dropping, but he's stable enough for surgery. He needs an OR now or he's not going to make it through the hour." Dr. Kellerman looked at the guy on the stretcher and actually took a step back, his hands automatically reaching for more sanitizer. "Has he been cleaned up? Decontaminated? When's the last time he had medical care? I can smell him from here, and God knows what kind of infections he might be carrying." Now, I've been around the block, right? Spent 15 months in Iraq, seen plenty of ugly situations. But the way this doctor was talking about a dying man, like he was some piece of contaminated equipment that had wandered in off the street, it made my blood boil. "Doctor, he's bleeding out," Nurse Williams said, and you could hear the urgency in her voice getting sharper. "We need to get him to surgery immediately. His pressure's dropping and his hemoglobin is probably in the basement." Kellerman shook his head, his whole posture screaming avoidance. "I'm not operating on that. Look at him. He's filthy. Probably hasn't had medical care in years. Could be carrying anything. Hepatitis, HIV, staph, MRSA, who knows what else. I'm not risking my surgical suite on some vagrant who probably got shot in a drug deal. The infection control protocols alone." "Dr. Kellerman," Nurse Williams interrupted, her voice getting ice-cold professional. "EMTALA isn't optional. He's presenting with an unstable emergency condition. The clock is running, and federal law requires us to stabilize him regardless of ability to pay or social status." The homeless guy was still conscious, and I could see his eyes were open. He could hear every word this jackass was saying about him. His lips were moving slightly, like he was trying to say something, but no sound was coming out. "Dr. Kellerman," the nurse pressed, "hospital policy requires us to treat all emergency cases regardless of ability to pay or social status." "Hospital policy doesn't require me to risk infection in my OR," Kellerman shot back. "Clean him up first. Get him stable with IV fluids. Maybe Dr. Martinez can handle it when he gets in tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow morning?" Nurse Williams looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "This man will be dead in 2 hours without surgery. You're the on-call surgeon tonight." Dr. Kellerman was already walking away. "Then call Dr. Peterson at General. Maybe they have room for charity cases. I have a reputation to maintain, and I'm not about to compromise my surgical record on some derelict who's probably going to die on the table anyway." I watched this whole exchange from my chair, and I was getting madder by the minute. Here's this doctor, sworn to do no harm, basically saying this human being wasn't worth saving because he didn't look clean enough. The homeless guy's eyes were still open, still aware, still listening to every cruel word. Nurse Williams was furious. "Doctor, I'm going to have to report this to the Chief of Staff. You cannot refuse emergency surgery based on a patient's appearance." "Report whatever you want," Kellerman said, not even turning around. "I'm not operating on him until he's properly decontaminated. Period." That's when something happened that I'll never forget as long as I live. The homeless guy on the stretcher managed to raise his head slightly, and in a voice that was weak but clear as a bell, he said, "Kellerman." The doctor stopped dead in his tracks. He turned around slowly, and you could see the confusion spreading across his face like someone had just told him his mother was an alien. "What did you say?" Kellerman asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The homeless guy tried to prop himself up a little more, wincing with the effort. Dick Kellerman, 3rd ID, 2005. Now, Dr. Kellerman's face went white, like white as fresh surgical gauze. He took a couple steps closer to the stretcher, really looking at the guy's face for the first time instead of just seeing the dirt and the smell and the torn clothes. "Combat Support Hospital," the homeless guy continued, his voice getting stronger despite the blood loss. "Forward Operating Base Liberty. You remember the VBIED that hit your convoy?" And just like that, Dr. Kellerman was 19 years old again, lying on a stretcher in a dusty field hospital tent in Iraq. The generator coughing and sputtering, mortar rounds whistling overhead, the smell of antiseptic and blood and desert sand, his chest on fire, shrapnel grinding against his ribs with every breath, steady hands working over him in the flickering light, hands that moved with absolute certainty even as the tent shook from explosions. A voice saying, "Stay with me, soldier. You're going home." The same voice he was hearing right now. The voice that had pulled him back from the edge of everything. Dr. Kellerman's mouth fell open. He moved closer to the stretcher, and I could see his hands starting to shake for a completely different reason now. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not... You can't be." The homeless guy managed a weak smile that somehow transformed his whole face. "Captain Marcus Sullivan, M.D., 31st Combat Support Hospital. I pulled 3 pieces of shrapnel out of your chest that day, Dick. Spent 4 hours keeping you alive while the base got mortared. Remember now?" Holy shit. I'm sitting there watching this unfold, and it's like something out of a movie. But this wasn't Hollywood. This was real life, happening right in front of me. Dr. Kellerman stumbled backward like he'd been hit with a brick. "Marcus? Oh my God. Marcus, is that really you?" "In the flesh," Captain Sullivan said, though his voice was getting weaker again. "Well, what's left of it?" Now let me paint you the picture of what Dr. Kellerman was remembering, because over the next few minutes it all came pouring out. Back in 2005, then Lieutenant Kellerman was a young medic attached to a supply convoy near Baghdad. Their convoy got hit by a VBIED, that's a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device for you civilians, and Kellerman took shrapnel to the chest. Bad hit. Life-threatening. They medevaced him to the Forward Operating Base Liberty, and the surgeon who operated on him was Captain Marcus Sullivan. Now I found out later that Dr. Sullivan was something of a legend in military medicine. The guy had nerves of steel and hands steadier than a Swiss watchmaker. He'd already saved dozens of soldiers by the time Kellerman rolled into his tent. But here's the kicker. The operation on Kellerman wasn't routine. The shrapnel had nicked an artery, and Kellerman was bleeding out fast. They were operating in a field hospital with limited supplies, under mortar fire, with the generators cutting in and out. Dr. Sullivan operated for 4 hours straight, without a break, under conditions that would make most surgeons pack up and go home. And he saved Kellerman's life. Not only saved it, but did such a good job that Kellerman made a full recovery and was able to pursue his dream of becoming a surgeon himself. So here's this homeless guy bleeding out on a stretcher, and he turns out to be the man who literally made Dr. Kellerman's entire career possible. "Marcus, what happened to you?" Kellerman asked, and you could see the guy was shaken to his core. "How did you end up... what?" Captain Sullivan closed his eyes for a moment. "Long story, Dick. Maybe we can catch up after you save my life this time." But Dr. Kellerman was still in shock. I didn't recognize you. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. You didn't recognize me because you didn't look, Sullivan said quietly. You saw the uniform I'm wearing now, homeless, dirty, smells bad, and you decided I wasn't worth your time. The truth of that statement hit Dr. Kellerman like a sledgehammer. Here he was, a successful surgeon making 6 figures a year, living in luxury, and he just refused to operate on the man who gave him that life in the first place. Nurse Williams had been listening to this whole exchange with her mouth hanging open. Dr. Kellerman, we need to get him to surgery now. He's lost a lot of blood. Yes, Kellerman said, finally snapping out of his shock. Yes, of course. Get him prepped immediately. I'll scrub in. Dick, Captain Sullivan said as they started wheeling him toward the OR. Remember what you used to tell me back at Liberty about wanting to be a surgeon so you could save lives like I saved yours? Dr. Kellerman was walking alongside the stretcher now, holding on to the rail. I remember. Don't let what I look like now change who you are, Sullivan said. Every patient deserves the same care you'd give your own family. And with that, they wheeled him into surgery. Now, I should mention that during all this drama, word had started to spread around the hospital. Nurses were whispering to each other, residents were gathering around, and somehow the story got out that the homeless guy in OR 3 was actually a decorated military surgeon. I decided to stick around. Hell, I couldn't leave after seeing all that. I planted myself in the waiting area and settled in for what I figured would be a long night. About an hour into the surgery, this older woman showed up. Distinguished-looking lady, probably in her 60s, wearing scrubs with Chief of Staff embroidered on the pocket. This was Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, and she looked like she had something to say. She walked straight up to the nurse's station and asked to speak with whoever was in charge of the situation with the homeless patient in OR 3. Nurse Williams came over, and Dr. Hartwell said, I understand there was some reluctance to treat the patient initially? That's putting it mildly, Nurse Williams replied. Dr. Kellerman refused to operate because the patient was homeless and appeared unclean. Dr. Hartwell's face went stone cold. He refused emergency surgery based on the patient's appearance? Yes, ma'am. Said he wouldn't risk his surgical suite on a vagrant, wanted to wait until tomorrow and hand it off to someone else. Dr. Hartwell was quiet for a long moment. And then, the patient recognized Dr. Kellerman. Turns out the patient is Dr. Marcus Sullivan, former Army surgeon who saved Dr. Kellerman's life in Iraq. I watched Dr. Hartwell's expression change from anger to something I couldn't quite read. Dr. Marcus Sullivan? Are you certain? Yes, ma'am. Dr. Kellerman confirmed it before they went into surgery. Dr. Hartwell nodded slowly. I see. Well, this changes things considerably. She walked away, but I could tell she was making mental notes about everything she'd just heard. This wasn't going to end well for Dr. Kellerman, and honestly, he had it coming. About 3 hours after surgery started, Dr. Kellerman finally emerged from the OR. He looked exhausted, emotionally drained, like he'd aged 10 years in one night. Nurse Williams met him at the door. How is he? She asked. Stable, Kellerman said quietly. It was touch and go for a while, but he's going to make it. The bullet missed his vital organs, but there was significant internal bleeding. He'll need to stay here for at least a week, maybe 2. Doctor, Nurse Williams said carefully, Dr. Hartwell wants to see you in her office first thing tomorrow morning. Dr. Kellerman nodded. He knew exactly what that meeting was going to be about. The laptop screen showed a metal citation, bronze star with V device. Listen to this. the vet continued. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States while serving as a trauma surgeon with the 31st Combat Support Hospital during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Captain Sullivan performed life-saving surgery on 7 critically wounded soldiers while under direct mortar fire. Another vet pulled up something on his phone. Look at this photo from 2006. He turned the screen around, and there was Dr. Sullivan in his Army uniform, standing next to a field hospital tent. Even through the grime and exhaustion in his face, you could see it was the same man who was now fighting for his life in OR3. A third guy had found a news article from a military newspaper. Says here he volunteered for a 3rd deployment when they were short on trauma surgeons. Guy could have gone home, but he stayed because soldiers were dying. But it was the old Marine who found the piece that made everyone go quiet. He'd been scrolling through his phone for 20 minutes when his face suddenly went pale. "Oh, Jesus," he whispered. "Guys, look at this." It was a recent article from a Detroit newspaper, just 3 months old. The headline read, "Decorated Army Surgeon Loses Medical License After PTSD Episode During Surgery." The article described how Dr. Sullivan had been operating on a car accident victim when he'd had a flashback triggered by the sound of the heart monitor. He'd frozen up for maybe 10 seconds, but that was enough. The patient survived, but the state medical board had suspended his license pending a psychological evaluation that kept getting delayed. Says here his wife filed for divorce 2 weeks after he lost his license, someone read aloud, took half his savings in the settlement. "And look at this part," another vet said, his voice getting angry. "Says he spent his last $30,000 on legal fees trying to get his license back. Been living in his car for 8 months. The waiting room had gone dead silent. Here was a man who had literally dedicated his life to saving others, and when he needed help the most, everyone had abandoned him. His wife, the medical system, society. They'd all turned their backs on a guy who'd spent 15 years putting his life on the line for strangers. About 3 hours after surgery started, Dr. Kellerman finally emerged from the OR. He looked like he'd aged a decade in one night. His surgical scrubs were soaked with sweat, his hands were shaking, and he had the 1,000-yard stare that we all recognized. Surgery is stressful enough when you're trying to save a stranger, when you're trying to save the man who made your entire career possible and you almost let him die because of your own prejudice. That's a different kind of pressure entirely. Nurse Williams met him at the door, along with about 20 veterans who had been waiting for news. "How is he?" she asked. "Stable," Kellerman said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was touch and go for a while. The bullet nicked his spleen and caused significant internal bleeding, but he's going to make it. He'll need to stay here for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer. There might be some complications from the delayed treatment." That last part hit like a slap. The delayed treatment that almost killed Dr. Sullivan was entirely Dr. Kellerman's fault. "Doctor," Nurse Williams said carefully, "Dr. Hartwell wants to see you in her office first thing tomorrow morning." Dr. Kellerman nodded. He knew exactly what that meeting was going to be about. But here's where the story takes another turn. See, while Dr. Sullivan was in recovery, the veterans in the waiting room had been busy. They'd been making phone calls, sending emails, posting on social media. Word was spreading through the veteran community like wildfire. And when veterans get pissed off about something, they don't just sit around complaining. They take action. The old Marine who'd been doing research stood up and addressed the room. "Listen up, people. I've been in touch with some folks. The American Legion is sending a representative. The VFW is mobilizing their legal team. and I just got off the phone with a guy who works for Senator Davidson's office. You know, the one who chairs the Veterans Affairs Committee. They want to hear about this." A Gulf War vet raised his hand. "I called my buddy at Channel 7 News. They're sending a crew over first thing tomorrow morning." Another guy chimed in. "My wife works for the state medical board. She says there's already an investigation being opened into Dr. Kellerman's conduct." Within hours, this had gone from a local hospital incident to a statewide scandal involving veteran rights, medical ethics, and systemic discrimination against homeless people. But the most interesting development came from an unexpected source. One of the newer guys in the waiting room, a young veteran who'd been quiet most of the night, finally spoke up. "I know Dr. Sullivan," he said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. "I was stationed at FOB Liberty in 2004 before Dr. Kellerman's incident. Dr. Sullivan saved my life too. Different circumstances, but same result. I stepped on an IED during a patrol, lost my left leg below the knee. Dr. Sullivan not only saved my life, he fought with the brass to get me the best prosthetic available, spent his own money to fly my wife over to Germany while I was recovering." The room was completely silent. "That man," the young vet continued, pointing toward the OR, "is the reason I'm able to walk today, the reason I was able to come home to my family, and some rich doctor almost let him bleed out in a hallway because he didn't like the way he smelled." And that's when I knew this story was about to explode in ways nobody could predict. The next morning, Dr. Kellerman showed up to his meeting with Dr. Hartwell, but he wasn't prepared for what he found. The hospital parking lot was full of news vans. Veterans with protest signs were standing outside the main entrance. Camera crews were setting up equipment all along the sidewalk. Inside the hospital, the lobby was packed with veterans, active-duty military personnel, and family members. Someone had brought a banner that read, "Heroes don't die because of prejudice." Another sign said, "Dr. Sullivan saved our lives. Who's saving his?" Dr. Kellerman had to walk through this crowd to get to the elevator, and every step was torture. These people weren't yelling or being violent, but their silent judgment was devastating. Here were dozens of people whose lives had been touched by Dr. Sullivan's service, and they all knew that Dr. Kellerman had almost let their hero die. The meeting with Dr. Hartwell took place in her office, which had windows overlooking the parking lot. As they talked, both of them could see the growing crowd of supporters outside. "Dr. Kellerman," Dr. Hartwell began, getting straight to the point, "I've reviewed the incident from Tuesday night. In your professional opinion, was the patient's condition life-threatening?" "Yes," Kellerman admitted. "Without immediate surgery, he would have died within 2 hours." "And your initial refusal to operate was based on what medical factors?" Kellerman was quiet for a long moment. "There were no medical factors. I refused because he was homeless and I thought he was dirty. I was concerned about infection control, but that was just an excuse. The real reason was that I found him distasteful." "You refused to provide emergency medical care to a dying man because you found him aesthetically displeasing?" When she put it like that, it sounded even worse. "Yes, ma'am." Dr. Hartwell leaned back in her chair and gestured toward the window. "Dr. Kellerman, do you see what's happening outside? That's not just a protest. That's a testament to the kind of man you almost let die. I've been getting phone calls all morning, from the state medical board, from the hospital's board of directors, from the mayor's office, from federal Veterans Affairs officials. This incident has become a national story." She picked up a tablet from her desk and started reading. "Dr. Marcus Sullivan, Bronze Star with V device, Purple Heart, Combat Medical Badge. 3 tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan. Credited with saving the lives of over 200 soldiers. After leaving the military, he worked for Doctors Without Borders for 2 years, then ran a free clinic in Detroit for homeless veterans. Dr. Kellerman felt sick to his stomach. This man, Dr. Hartwell continued, has dedicated his entire adult life to saving others, and you looked at him lying on a stretcher bleeding to death and decided he wasn't worth your time because he didn't meet your aesthetic standards. The meeting went on for another hour, but the writing was on the wall. Dr. Kellerman was placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. The hospital board would be reviewing his case, and there would likely be a formal hearing. The state medical board was opening their own investigation, and there was talk of federal civil rights violations being filed. But the story didn't end there. See, someone at the hospital had contacted the local VA about Dr. Sullivan's situation. And once the VA got involved, things started moving fast. Within 48 hours, there were veterans advocates in the hospital around the clock. By the end of the week, 3 different news stations had picked up the story, and once the media got hold of it, all hell broke loose. CNN ran a segment called "When Heroes Fall Through the Cracks." Fox News did a story on veteran homelessness and medical discrimination. The story went viral faster than a military scandal. Hashtag Dr. Sullivan deserves. Better was trending on Twitter. Facebook groups with names like Justice for Military Heroes popped up overnight. Dr. Kellerman's picture was all over the internet, and not in a good way. The hospital's phones were ringing off the hook with angry callers demanding his termination. Medical ethics boards in 3 states were launching investigations. The Joint Commission announced they would be reviewing St. Mary's accreditation, and the American Medical Association issued a statement condemning any physician who would deny emergency care based on a patient's social status. Meanwhile, Dr. Sullivan was recovering in room 314, and he had a steady stream of visitors. It started with the veterans from that first night, but word kept spreading. Veterans from all over the country were making pilgrimages to see him. Military medical personnel who had served with him were flying in from across the nation. The commanding officer of the local Army base came by personally to thank him for his service. On Thursday morning, a general showed up. Not just any general, but Lieutenant General Patricia Hayes, the Army Surgeon General herself. She'd flown in from Washington specifically to visit Dr. Sullivan, and when the media found out, the story exploded all over again. I was there that day, visiting Dr. Sullivan like I'd been doing every morning since the shooting. The man was looking better, still pale, still weak, but his eyes had that spark back. We were just talking about his recovery when this entourage walked in. Security guards, aides, and then this woman in Army dress uniform with more stars than I'd ever seen up close. "Captain Sullivan," General Hayes said, snapping to attention and offering a crisp salute. "It's an honor to meet you, sir." Dr. Sullivan tried to sit up straighter in his hospital bed. "General, you didn't need to come all this way." "Yes, I did," she replied firmly. "What happened to you here is unacceptable. But more than that, I wanted to personally thank you for your service and to tell you that the Army doesn't forget its heroes." She handed him an official-looking folder. Inside there, you'll find a letter from the Secretary of the Army and documentation for a service-connected disability rating that should have been processed years ago. You'll also find information about a position, if you're interested. Director of Trauma Medicine at Walter Reed. The salary is competitive, and it comes with full medical benefits and housing allowance. Dr. Sullivan stared at the folder like it contained a winning lottery ticket. "General, my license." "Is being expedited for reinstatement," she said with a slight smile. "I had a conversation this morning with the chairman of the state medical board. Funny how quickly bureaucratic red tape disappears when you're dealing with a war hero who was denied medical care because of homelessness." The media was having a field day with General Hayes's visit. Photos of the Army's top medical officer saluting a homeless veteran in a hospital bed were on the front page of every major newspaper. The optics were powerful and devastating. Here was the military honoring a man that civilian society had literally left to die in the street. But the most powerful moment came about a week after the surgery. Dr. Sullivan was strong enough to have longer conversations now, and I was visiting when Dr. Kellerman knocked on the door. "Marcus," he said quietly, looking like a man who'd been carrying the weight of the world, "could I talk to you for a minute?" Dr. Sullivan gestured for him to come in. Dr. Kellerman looked like hell. Hadn't slept in days, probably hadn't eaten much either. The stress of the investigation and the media attention was clearly taking its toll. His hands were still shaking, but now it was from anxiety rather than surgical fatigue. "I wanted to apologize," Kellerman began, his voice breaking slightly. "Not just for the other night, but for losing my way, for forgetting why I became a doctor in the first place." Dr. Sullivan listened without saying anything, just watching this broken man try to find the words. "You saved my life in Iraq," Kellerman continued. "And you didn't just save it. You gave me the chance to become a surgeon, to help people, to make a difference. I took that gift and I turned it into something ugly. I started caring more about money and reputation than about helping people." He sat down heavily in the chair next to the bed, putting his head in his hands. "The other night when I saw you lying there, I didn't see a fellow doctor or a war hero or the man who saved my life. I saw someone I thought was beneath me, and that makes me sick to my stomach." Dr. Sullivan finally spoke. "Dick, we all lose our way sometimes. The question is what we do when we find our way back." "I don't know if I can find my way back from this," Kellerman said. "The hospital board is meeting next week. I'll probably lose my job, maybe my license. The media is calling me the face of medical discrimination. My wife is talking about divorce. And honestly, maybe I deserve all of it." "You think you deserve to lose everything because you made one bad decision?" Dr. Sullivan asked. "It wasn't just one bad decision, it was a pattern. I've been turning away patients for months, maybe years, if they couldn't pay or if they weren't the right kind of patient for my image. You were just the first one who turned out to be someone I couldn't ignore." Dr. Sullivan was quiet for a moment, studying Dr. Kellerman's face. Then he said something that surprised everyone in the room, including me. "Dick, I want to ask you something. If you could keep your job, if you could start over, what would you do differently?" Kellerman looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if you had a second chance, how would you use it?" I'd try to remember why I became a doctor. To help people. All people. Regardless of what they look like or where they come from." Dr. Sullivan nodded slowly. "Then I have a proposition for you." And that's when Dr. Sullivan did something that nobody saw coming. He offered to speak on Dr. Kellerman's behalf at the hospital board hearing. The room went dead silent. I thought I'd misheard him. "Marcus," I said, "are you sure about this? This guy almost let you die." Dr. Sullivan looked at me with those steady eyes that had seen too much war and too much suffering, which is exactly why he needs to understand what he almost did, and why he's the right person to make sure it never happens to anyone else. Now, you might think Dr. Sullivan was being too forgiving, too willing to let bygones be bygones. But I think he saw something in Dr. Kellerman that the rest of us missed. He saw a man who had genuinely lost his way, but could find it again with the right guidance. And he understood something about redemption that most people never learn. Sometimes the person who hurts you the most is the one who can do the most good if they truly change. The hospital board hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. The room was packed beyond capacity. Hospital administrators, doctors, nurses, veterans advocates, media representatives, and what looked like half the military population of the state. Dr. Kellerman sat at a table facing the board, looking like a man waiting for his execution. Dr. Sullivan was still in a wheelchair, but he'd insisted on attending. When it came time for him to speak, the room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. "Distinguished members of the board," he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded respect in operating rooms under fire. "I'm here today not to condemn Dr. Kellerman, but to ask you to consider the full context of what happened that night." He went on to tell the story of how Dr. Kellerman had saved his life in Iraq, how the young medic had dedicated himself to becoming a surgeon so he could help others the way Dr. Sullivan had helped him. "The man who refused to operate on me that night is not the real Dick Kellerman," Dr. Sullivan said, his words carrying across the packed room. "The real Dick Kellerman is the man who spent 4 hours operating on me to save my life, even after he realized what he had done. The real Dick Kellerman is the man who came to my room to apologize, not because he had to, but because he needed to." The board was clearly moved by Dr. Sullivan's words, but they had responsibilities to uphold. "Dr. Sullivan," the board chair said, "while we appreciate your forgiveness, Dr. Kellerman violated basic medical ethics and hospital policy. How can we justify keeping him on staff?" Dr. Sullivan leaned forward in his wheelchair. "You can't," he replied, "at least not without consequences. But I'd like to propose an alternative to termination." And then Dr. Sullivan said the words that would become legendary in medical ethics discussions for years to come. "Don't fire him. Deploy him." The room was so quiet you could hear the ventilation system humming. Every person in that packed hearing room was hanging on Dr. Sullivan's next words. He laid out a plan that was so brilliant, so perfectly crafted, that I'm still amazed he came up with it while recovering from major surgery. "Dr. Kellerman will be suspended without pay for 6 months, Dr. Sullivan began, his voice steady and commanding. "During that time, he'll complete 500 hours of community service at the VA hospital, working specifically with homeless veterans. He'll undergo sensitivity training, psychiatric evaluation, and regular progress reviews." The board members were taking notes furiously. "But here's the crucial part," Dr. Sullivan continued. "I will personally supervise his community service and mentor him through the process. I want him to work directly with the men and women who've served our country and are now struggling with homelessness, PTSD, addiction, and other challenges. I want him to see that every patient has a story, has value, has dignity." Dr. Sullivan paused, letting his words sink in. "Give him a chance to remember who he wanted to be when he first decided to become a doctor. Let him work with heroes who've fallen through the cracks of society. Let him understand that the difference between Dr. Kellerman and the homeless vet he almost refused to treat is nothing more than circumstance and luck." One of the board members leaned forward. "Dr. Sullivan, what makes you think this approach will work? What's to stop Dr. Kellerman from simply going through the motions for 6 months and then returning to his old ways?" Dr. Sullivan smiled for the first time since I'd met him. "Because I'm going to make sure he understands something that took me years to learn. In medicine, we don't just treat diseases, we treat human beings. And every human being, regardless of their circumstances, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. He gestured toward Dr. Kellerman, who was sitting with tears streaming down his face. This man saved my life once before in conditions that were far worse than anything we face in this hospital. He has the skill and the intelligence to be an exceptional surgeon. What he lacks is perspective, and that's something I can teach him. The board deliberated for 3 hours. When they came back, they had reached a decision that would reshape how medical ethics were taught across the country. Dr. Kellerman would be suspended for 6 months without pay. He would complete 500 hours of community service under Dr. Sullivan's supervision. He would undergo sensitivity training and regular evaluation. And if he successfully completed all requirements, he could return to his position at the hospital, but with the understanding that any future violations would result in immediate termination. It wasn't the punishment many people wanted, but it was something else. It was a chance at redemption. The next 6 months transformed both men in ways that nobody could have predicted. Dr. Kellerman started working at the VA hospital 3 days a week, and I saw him there regularly during my own appointments. The change in him was remarkable to witness. He started out reluctant and defensive, clearly just going through the motions. But as the weeks went by, something fundamental shifted in his perspective. He began to really listen to the veterans' stories. He learned about Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who'd lost both legs to an IED and was living in his car because the VA disability payments were delayed. He met Corporal Johnson, a female Marine who was struggling with military sexual trauma and had turned to alcohol to cope. He worked with Private Williams, a 22-year-old kid who'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan and was so messed up by PTSD that he couldn't hold down a job. Each story was a revelation. Each patient was a reminder that the line between success and failure, between stability and homelessness, between respect and invisibility, was thinner than most people realized. Dr. Sullivan, meanwhile, was working on getting his own medical license reinstated. The publicity from the hospital incident had actually helped his case. Veterans advocacy groups had taken up his cause, and several prominent doctors had vouched for his character and abilities. General Hayes had kept her word, and the bureaucratic red tape that had delayed his case for 2 years suddenly disappeared. But the most powerful transformation happened when Dr. Sullivan started working alongside Dr. Kellerman at the VA. It began as supervision, but it evolved into partnership. They started developing new protocols for treating homeless veterans, creating programs that addressed not just medical needs, but psychological, social, and economic challenges. I watched them work together on a case that perfectly illustrated how much both men had changed. A homeless veteran named Tommy had come in with what looked like a simple infected wound on his leg. In the old days, Dr. Kellerman would have treated the infection and sent him on his way. But now, working with Dr. Sullivan, they discovered that Tommy was a Gulf War vet who'd been living under a bridge for 3 years. The infection was a symptom of a much larger problem: untreated diabetes, PTSD, and complete social isolation. Instead of just treating the wound, they coordinated with social workers, mental health professionals, and housing advocates. They got Tommy into a transitional housing program, connected him with VA benefits he'd never applied for, and set up a comprehensive treatment plan for his diabetes and PTSD. 3 months later, Tommy had his own apartment, a part-time job, and was managing his diabetes effectively. He came back to the hospital to thank Dr. Kellerman and Dr. Sullivan, and I happened to be there that day. "Doc," Tommy said to Dr. Kellerman, I don't know what happened to change your approach, but you saved my life. Not just medically, you saved my whole life." Dr. Kellerman looked at Dr. Sullivan and said, "I had a good teacher." 6 months after the hearing, Dr. Kellerman returned to St. Mary's Hospital, but he was a fundamentally different doctor than the one who had left. He volunteered to take additional shifts in the ER, specifically to treat uninsured and homeless patients. He started a program to provide free medical care to homeless veterans 1 weekend per month. He began speaking at medical schools about the importance of treating all patients with dignity and respect. And Dr. Sullivan? He got his license back and was offered his choice of positions. Walter Reed was still interested, but he'd also been offered the directorship of Veteran Services at St. Mary's. He chose St. Mary's with the condition that he could continue his work with homeless patients and that Dr. Kellerman could be his partner in developing the program. The two men who had been brought together by war, separated by circumstance, and reunited by crisis, became partners in a mission to ensure that no veteran would ever be turned away from medical care because of their appearance or economic status. But the story doesn't end there, because the impact of what happened that night rippled outward in ways nobody expected. The hospital implemented new policies requiring all staff to undergo training on treating homeless and veteran patients. The city launched a new program to provide housing and medical care for homeless veterans. 3 other hospitals in the area started similar programs, calling them Sullivan Protocols, in honor of Dr. Sullivan. The State Medical Board changed its procedures for reviewing cases involving veterans with PTSD, ensuring that service-connected mental health issues were properly considered. Several medical schools added courses on treating marginalized populations to their required curriculum. Dr. Kellerman became a different kind of surgeon, still skilled, still successful, but motivated by service rather than money. He started speaking at medical conferences about unconscious bias in healthcare. He wrote articles for medical journals about the importance of seeing the person behind the patient. Dr. Sullivan used his new position to create a comprehensive support system for veterans struggling with homelessness, addiction, and mental health issues. He worked with local organizations to provide not just medical care, but housing assistance, job training, and counseling services. And the visual moments that captured the public imagination? They were powerful and unforgettable. There was the photo of Dr. Sullivan in his wheelchair, speaking at the hospital board hearing, with Dr. Kellerman sitting at the defendant's table in the background. The image went viral with captions like, "When heroes advocate for second chances." There was the picture of the plaque installation in the lobby of St. Mary's Hospital. The bronze plaque reads, "In honor of all veterans who have served our country with courage and sacrifice, you will always be welcome here." Below that, in smaller text, "Donated by Dr. Richard Kellerman and Dr. Marcus Sullivan." The photo shows Dr. Kellerman's hands installing the last screw, with Dr. Sullivan standing beside him in his dress uniform, both men smiling. But the most powerful image was taken 6 months later during a joint medical clinic for homeless veterans. The photo shows 4 hands in surgical scrubs working on the same patient, 2 belonging to Dr. Kellerman, 2 to Dr. Sullivan. You can't see their faces, just their hands working together to save a life. The caption simply reads, "Redemption." That photo won a Pulitzer Prize for feature photography. The veteran they were treating in that photo was a Marine who'd been living under a freeway overpass for 2 years. He'd been shot during a drug deal gone wrong, not as a participant, but as an innocent bystander who'd been sleeping in the wrong place at the wrong time. Just like Dr. Sullivan, he was initially viewed with suspicion and prejudice. But this time, things were different. This time, Two doctors who understood the value of second chances worked together to save his life. This time, a homeless veteran received the same quality of care that would be given to a millionaire. This time, the system worked the way it was supposed to. And me? Well, I kept going to my appointments at St. Mary's, and I got to watch this whole transformation happen in real time. I saw Dr. Kellerman go from being an arrogant, elitist surgeon to someone who genuinely cared about every patient who walked through the door. I saw Dr. Sullivan build something beautiful out of the worst period of his life. But most importantly, I saw what can happen when someone gets a second chance and chooses to make the most of it. There's something different about St. Mary's Hospital now. You can feel it the moment you walk in. The staff treats everyone with respect, regardless of their appearance or ability to pay. The ER has become a model for other hospitals across the country. Medical students come from around the world to study the St. Mary's approach to treating marginalized patients. Every time I walk past that plaque in the lobby, I think about that night in October when everything changed. I think about how easy it is to judge someone based on their appearance, their circumstances, their current situation. I think about how many heroes are walking around among us, invisible because we're not really looking. And I think about the fact that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe has a way of bringing people together exactly when they need each other most. Dr. Kellerman needed to remember why he became a doctor. Dr. Sullivan needed someone to believe he was still worth saving. And both of them needed to learn that redemption is always possible, even when it seems like all hope is lost. The last time I saw them together was at a Veterans Appreciation Dinner last month. The event was held at the Convention Center downtown with over 500 attendees, veterans, active duty military, family members, and supporters. Dr. Sullivan was the keynote speaker, talking about the importance of supporting veterans who are struggling with homelessness and mental health issues. During his speech, he called Dr. Kellerman up to the stage. "This man," Dr. Sullivan said, his voice carrying across the packed auditorium, "taught me something important about second chances. He reminded me that people can change, that redemption is possible, and that sometimes the person who hurts you the most can become your greatest ally." The crowd gave them a standing ovation that lasted for 5 full minutes. After the dinner, I saw them standing together in the parking lot, talking with a young homeless veteran who had approached them for help. Dr. Kellerman was writing down information about transitional housing programs. Dr. Sullivan was explaining how to apply for VA benefits. Both of them were treating this young man with the same respect and attention they would give to any patient. They caught each other's eye across the conversation and nodded, just a simple acknowledgement between two men who had saved each other's lives in different ways, at different times, under different circumstances. That's when I knew that some stories really do have happy endings. Not because everything works out perfectly, but because people choose to grow, to change, to become better than they were before. Sometimes that's enough to restore your faith in humanity. Sometimes that's everything. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, you get to witness the moment when two broken people help each other heal, and in doing so, heal a small part of the world around them. That night in October changed all of our lives. It reminded us that heroes don't always wear uniforms, that second chances are worth giving, and that the difference between any of us and the homeless person on the street corner is often nothing more than luck and circumstance. Most importantly, it taught us that in a world that can be cold and judgmental and cruel, sometimes all it takes is one person willing to see the humanity in another to change everything. Dr. Sullivan and Dr. Kellerman are still working together, still saving lives, still proving every day that redemption is possible. Their story has become legendary in medical circles, required reading and ethics courses, and inspiration for healthcare workers around the world. But for me, it will always be the story of two men who found their way back to who they were meant to be, one patient at a time,